Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to find that everything familiar, your routines, your roles, even the face you present to the world, was suddenly stripped away. No job title to cling to, no family expectations weighing on you, no carefully constructed mask you've been polishing for years. Just you, raw, unguarded, naked before your own conscience. Would you feel liberated or terrified? Carl Jung believed that most people would crumble under such a confrontation. Not because they lack intelligence or resources, but because they lack the strength to obey the single rule that governs true psychological freedom. The command to face the darkest, most unacknowledged parts of themselves without flinching. This is the law of radical self-honesty. A command that demands you enter into the labyrinth of your unconscious, look at the monsters hiding there, and refuse to turn away. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating shadow with light, instinct with intellect, chaos with order. Yet he warned that most of us are too weak to undertake it, because obeying this rule requires a betrayal of the life we think we want, and a direct plunge into the life we secretly fear. Think of the masks we wear. We say we want happiness, but most of us are addicted to distraction. We say we seek love, but sabotage intimacy with hidden resentments. We say we desire freedom, but cling to our chains because they feel safer than the unknown. To break these illusions, Jung insists we must enter the forbidden chamber of the psyche where every lie we tell ourselves is exposed. And that is the task people recoil from, not because it's impossible, but because it demands the death of who we pretend to be. Here lies the paradox. The very thing we avoid is the key to the life we crave. To discover authentic strength, one must embrace weakness. To find peace, one must first endure the war within. To gain freedom, one must stand voluntarily in the presence of fear. Jung observed that the human mind instinctively resists this, prefers repression to revelation. It builds elaborate defense mechanisms, not unlike a fortress, to keep the shadow locked away. The ego wants to appear noble, righteous, secure. So it edits the truth, conceals desire, and whispers comforting lies. But the shadow does not vanish. It leaks into our relationships, warps our ambitions, and silently orchestrates our failures. You can see this in the successful man who secretly sabotages every achievement, as if success feels undeserved. Or the devoted partner who unconsciously provokes conflict, driven by old wounds they refuse to acknowledge. The unexamined shadow ensures that we remain prisoners of invisible chains. Jung's unyielding message: the only escape is obedience to the law of truth within. You must dare to confront the very aspects of yourself you most despise, for those are the fragments that hold the key to your wholeness. As Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. To gaze into that abyss is precisely the rule Jung demands we follow. It is not enough to polish your virtues or amplify your talents. You must drag your fears, lusts, envies, and hatreds into the light, not to destroy them, but to integrate them. To disobey is to remain half alive, bound by compulsions you neither understand nor control. And yet, what makes this rule so unbearable is not its logic, but its consequence. For to truly obey, you must risk dismantling the life you've built on false foundations. You may lose the approval of those who only knew your mask. You may abandon ambitions that no longer fit your soul. You may even face the disorienting revelation that you have been living someone else's story all along. The question is, are you willing to pay that price? Why do we resist so fiercely the rule of radical self-honesty? Why is it easier to construct entire civilizations of distraction than to sit still for 1 hour and face the storm within? Jung believed the answer lies in the architecture of the human psyche itself, a structure designed not only for survival but for concealment. At the surface lies the persona, the mask, the curated image of ourselves that we present to the world. This is the diplomat of the psyche, negotiating social life, keeping us acceptable, polished, and functional. Without it, society would collapse into chaos. But the persona's flaw is its hunger for approval. It edits, distorts, and censors until the truth of the self becomes unrecognizable. Beneath the persona lies the shadow, the hidden reservoir of all that we repress. Our forbidden desires, our humiliations, our shame, and our rage. Jung described it as the dark twin of the conscious self, carrying everything we would rather not admit belongs to us. And yet, the shadow is not evil. It is simply raw, unfiltered energy. Left unexamined, it corrupts. Confronted with courage, it transforms. But here is the trap. The ego, desperate to preserve its fragile image, resists the shadow at all costs. It builds walls of denial, rationalization, and projection. We condemn others for the very sins we refuse to see in ourselves. We despise arrogance in others, while secretly harboring our own. We judge cruelty while ignoring the petty violences in our own words. The more we repress, the more viciously we attack those who mirror our buried traits. This is why society itself is complicit in the avoidance of self-honesty. Entire systems of distraction are built to prevent us from facing what Jung called the unlived life within. Consumer culture thrives on keeping us busy with endless desires. The next purchase, the next status symbol, the next digital fix. Entertainment numbs the silence where inner voices might speak. Social media rewards curated fragments of identity, not raw authenticity. Even religious and political institutions, while offering guidance, often demand conformity at the expense of inner exploration. And so we live behind barricades. We identify so completely with the mask that we forget it is only a mask. We allow the persona to stand in for the self until even in solitude, we perform for an imagined audience. But deep within, something knows, something aches, something waits. The psyche longs for integration. It demands that the exiled fragments return home. Yet most of us resist because we fear annihilation. If I confront my envy, will it consume me? If I admit my cowardice, will I collapse into despair? If I acknowledge my secret rage, will it destroy my relationships? These are not trivial fears. They are the whispers of the ego, terrified of losing its throne. But Jung argued that refusing the shadow does not preserve the self, it fractures it. We become divided, at war with our own unconscious. This inner conflict then spills into the outer world. Nations project their shadows onto enemies. Communities scapegoat minorities. Families repeat cycles of abuse. The unexamined shadow, whether personal or collective, always seeks expression. And when denied the light of consciousness, it emerges in violence. This is why Jung described modern humanity as possessed by forces it refuses to recognize. We are ruled by the very impulses we deny, like puppets on strings we pretend not to see. To obey the rule of self-honesty is to cut those strings. To disobey is to live in quiet servitude, enslaved not by society, but by our own refusal to look inward. Soren Kierkegaard once remarked, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are." This is the despair Jung saw all around him. People who mistake their persona for their soul, people who are too weak, or perhaps too afraid, to embark on the path of individuation. And so the question deepens. If the resistance to truth is so deeply wired into us, woven into our culture, our psychology, even our daily habits, how does one begin to break free? Breaking free begins with descent, a deliberate journey into the underworld of the psyche. Jung insisted that no genuine growth is possible without first encountering the darkness we fear most. It is not a polite exercise in self-reflection. It is an initiation, a dangerous confrontation that feels like death before it feels like rebirth. Imagine standing before a locked door deep within yourself. You know something waits behind it, something you've worked your entire life to avoid. The ego trembles at the thought of opening it. Yet Jung's command is clear: open it anyway. Behind that door lies the shadow, and until you step inside, you will never know who you truly are. The first stage of this descent is recognition. You begin to notice patterns in your life, the conflicts that repeat, the habits that sabotage, the emotions that surface at inconvenient times. Instead of blaming circumstances or other people, you dare to ask, what part of me is orchestrating this? What do I refuse to acknowledge that keeps returning in disguise? The second stage is confrontation. Here the journey becomes perilous. The shadow is not a tame guest. It will resist exposure. You may feel overwhelming guilt when you glimpse your hidden envy. You may feel terror when you confront your latent aggression. You may recoil at desires that contradict your moral image. Many abandon the path here, unable to reconcile who they think they are with what they discover. But Jung insisted that confrontation is not condemnation. To see your shadow does not mean you are evil. It means you are finally becoming whole. The third stage is integration. This is not about indulging the shadow, nor about destroying it. It is about recognizing its energy, its wisdom, and its role in making you complete. The anger you repress may become the fire that fuels your courage. The envy you deny may reveal the unlived dreams you must pursue. The fear you avoid may point toward the very challenge that will make you strong. Integration transforms poison into medicine, chaos into creativity, shadow into strength. Yet, the path is dangerous because the shadow is seductive. To confront your darkness without discipline can lead to possession, where the shadow takes control and overwhelms the conscious self. History is littered with figures who mistook shadow for liberation. Leaders intoxicated by power, thinkers consumed by obsession, ordinary people swallowed by addictions they mistook for freedom. This is why Jung emphasized the need for balance. You must confront the shadow with courage, but also with humility. You must be willing to wrestle with it, but not surrender to it. It is in this dance between confrontation and integration that individuation occurs. The self begins to expand beyond the narrow limits of the persona. You no longer live merely for approval or safety. You begin to live from an inner center, where shadow and light coexist, neither denied nor dominant. You become less predictable, less easily manipulated, less enslaved by unconscious compulsions. You begin to live as a whole being. But Jung was honest about the cost. Most will not make this descent. They will feel the pull of the shadow and retreat. They will glimpse the abyss and turn away. They will choose the comfort of illusions over the agony of truth. And yet, Jung believed that for those who endure, the descent into the shadow is the doorway to authentic life. As Joseph Campbell, the mythologist inspired by Jung's work, observed, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. That cave is the shadow. The treasure is your soul, undivided and alive." The question remains, how does one cultivate the courage to enter this cave, to endure the confrontation, and to emerge with the treasure intact? To confront the shadow is not simply a matter of insight. It is a trial by fire. Jung often described the individuation process as an ordeal, a crucible in which the false self is burned away so that the authentic self can emerge. This is why the journey demands courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to endure it. Courage in this sense is not a spontaneous burst of heroism. It is a discipline, cultivated in the small moments where you choose truth over comfort. When you admit to yourself that your resentment toward a friend masks envy. When you acknowledge that your relentless busyness hides a fear of emptiness. When you confess, even in solitude, the desires that contradict your image of virtue. Each act of honesty is a blow against the fortress of the ego, and each blow requires courage. But courage alone is not enough. The process also requires sacrifice. The shadow does not integrate without demanding something in return. You must be willing to relinquish illusions, ambitions, and attachments that no longer serve the whole of who you are. Jung warned that individuation often dismantles the life you thought you wanted. Friendships may fracture when you stop playing the role they depended on. Careers may crumble when you recognize they were built on someone else's expectations. Relationships may falter when you no longer hide behind masks of compliance. This is the price of obedience to the law of radical self-honesty. The old life must die for the new life to be born. And this death is not metaphorical. It is felt as loss, grief, even despair. Jung likened it to a descent into the mythic underworld, where one must surrender the treasures of the surface world before retrieving the gold hidden below. Here myth becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a guide. Across cultures, stories echo this pattern. The hero ventures into darkness, confronts monsters, sacrifices what is most precious, and emerges transformed. These myths are not entertainment. They are maps of the human soul. They reveal that courage and sacrifice are not optional but essential. Without them, the shadow overwhelms. With them, the shadow becomes the crucible of transformation. Consider the myth of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who descends into the underworld. At each gate she passes through, she must surrender a piece of her adornment, her crown, her jewels, her robe, until she stands naked before the queen of the dead. This stripping is brutal but necessary. Only by sacrificing her surface identity can she confront the depths. Only through death can she return renewed. Jung saw in such myths the same truth he demanded of us. You cannot integrate the shadow while clinging to the persona. Something must be stripped away. This stripping is terrifying because it reveals how fragile our constructed identities truly are. We are not who we thought we were. We are not the roles we perform, the achievements we polish, the reputations we defend. Beneath those masks is a stranger, someone raw, complex, and unfamiliar. To meet this stranger is unsettling, but it is also the beginning of authenticity. The philosopher Simone once wrote, "Attachment is the great fabricator of illusions. Reality can be obtained only by someone who is detached. To detach is to sacrifice, to let illusions fall away even when it feels like losing yourself. But in truth, you are not losing yourself. You are uncovering yourself. And yet, even after courage is summoned and sacrifices are made, the journey is not complete." For Jung, individuation was not only about facing the shadow, but about finding a higher order of meaning that could hold both shadow and light in harmony. Without this, one risks collapsing into despair or nihilism. The crucible must lead somewhere. The descent must be followed by ascent. The sacrifice must yield rebirth. The question, then, is this: what is the destination of individuation, the purpose of obeying this unbearable rule? The purpose of obeying Jung's impossible rule, the demand for radical self-honesty, is not destruction for its own sake. It is rebirth. It is the slow, painful construction of a self that is no longer divided against itself, no longer at war with its own depths. Jung called this destination individuation, the realization of wholeness. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not sainthood, nor the sterile polishing of character. Wholeness means becoming real. It means embracing contradictions within yourself without denying or exaggerating them. You are not merely your persona, nor merely your shadow. You are the union of both. You are anger and compassion, cowardice and courage, envy and creativity, fear and strength. To be whole is to carry the paradox and yet not be shattered by it. When shadow is integrated, its energy becomes fuel. The aggression once hidden becomes assertiveness. The envy once repressed becomes aspiration. The shame once buried becomes humility. Every fragment of the self finds its rightful place, no longer sabotaging from the dark, but contributing to the fullness of being. You are no longer possessed by what you deny. You are animated by what you have claimed. This is why Jung believed that individuation is not selfish, but profoundly ethical. A divided person wounds others with their unconscious conflicts. But a whole person, though not flawless, is trustworthy. They no longer project their shadow onto others, no longer scapegoat or condemn to avoid themselves. Instead, they radiate authenticity. They may be unsettling, even unpredictable, but their presence is real, and therefore liberating to those around them. The journey toward wholeness also unlocks meaning. Jung observed that the modern crisis was not merely technological or political, but spiritual. People live in comfort yet feel empty, successful yet feel restless, connected yet feel profoundly alone. Why? Because they are not living from their center. They are living as fragments, chasing goals that reflect the demands of persona, not the calling of the soul. Individuation reorients life toward inner necessity. You begin to sense what is uniquely yours to do, not what culture or family has prescribed. You begin to feel life as meaningful, not because it is free from suffering, but because suffering itself is woven into a larger story. This, Jung believed, was the antidote to the despair of modern man. Not the promise of endless pleasure or the fantasy of control, but the lived reality of integration. A life in which tragedy and joy, shadow and light, death and renewal are accepted as parts of the whole. A life in which you are no longer running from yourself, but walking alongside every fragment of your being. But here is the final paradox. Though wholeness is the deepest desire of the soul, most will never arrive. The rule remains too heavy, the shadow too frightening, the sacrifices too costly. And yet, even small acts of honesty carry immense power. Every time you confront instead of repress, every time you acknowledge instead of deny, every time you integrate instead of project, you move closer to authenticity. The journey is not about completion, it is about direction. Wholeness is not a static state you achieve once and for all. It is a lifelong unfolding. Each descent into darkness and each ascent into light deepens the self. Each act of courage, each sacrifice, each confrontation brings you nearer to the center where the opposites unite. In the end, Jung's rule is both unbearable and unavoidable. To disobey is to live half alive, trapped in illusions and compulsions. To obey is to risk everything you think you are, only to discover who you have been all along. As Carl Jung himself wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The task is before you. The abyss waits. The question is no longer whether you are strong enough to obey, but whether you are willing.